They thought I was a naive old man until they understood what I had done. There's something nobody tells you about getting old. It's not the aching joints or the slower mornings or the way a cold sticks around twice as long as it used to. It's the moment you realize that the people around you have started talking about your life as if you're already gone from it. Not with cruelty exactly, more like the quiet administrative certainty of someone who's already decided how a thing is going to go and just needs the paperwork to catch up. I noticed it happening the way you notice a slow leak. First, the conversations that stopped when I walked into a room. Then the decisions made without a phone call. Then those looks between Daniel and his wife. That half-second exchange that says everything they've agreed not to say out loud. I let it go on. I said nothing. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is the longest and most deliberate move you can make. My name is Walter Hayes. I'm 86 years old. I live in a house on the edge of a small town in Ohio that most maps don't bother naming twice, and I've lived here for 41 years. The house isn't much to look at from the road. White siding, a front porch with 2 chairs, a yard that I keep up myself even now, even with these hands. But inside it carries 41 years of a life I built with Margaret, piece by piece, the way you build things when you don't have money but you have time, and you're not afraid of work. I spent 38 years as a mechanic. I know what it means to get underneath something broken and figure out how to fix it from the inside out. That kind of work teaches you things that no classroom can. Patience, mostly, and the understanding that the thing you can see is rarely the whole problem. Margaret died 3 years ago, on a Sunday in late October when the leaves were already down, and the yard had that gray, quiet look of a season ending. She went the way she'd lived, without complaint, without drama, just an exhale and then stillness. I sat with her a long time after. I didn't know what else to do, and I found over the years that when you don't know what to do, staying still is usually better than filling silence with noise. The house felt different when I finally walked downstairs. Not emptier exactly, but rearranged, like furniture had been moved in every room without anything actually moving. I kept her reading glasses on the table by her chair. I still do. Some mornings I forget and reach for them like they're mine. And for a second that's not a bad feeling. My body has slowed since she left. The hip gets stiff in cold weather. My hearing isn't what it was. And people have taken to speaking loudly at me in the particular tone people use with the very young and the very old, as if volume is the same as clarity. I let them. I stopped correcting people a long time ago. There are worse things than being underestimated, and one of them is letting the people who underestimate you know exactly how wrong they are before the time is right. Daniel is my son, my only child. I love him in that complicated way fathers love sons who grew up watching them work and learned the work ethic but missed the values underneath it. He's 51 now, lives about an hour away, has a good-looking house with a mortgage he's talked around whenever I've asked directly. His wife, Karen, is the kind of organized that can tip into cold. She has opinions about efficiency. She has a spreadsheet, I'm fairly certain, for every major life event. She's not a villain. I want to be fair about that. But she is the kind of person who, when she looks at an old house with a paid-off deed in a slow market, does not see the 41 years inside it. She sees square footage. The conversation started, as these conversations always do, with concern. Dad, don't you think the house is getting to be a lot to manage on your own? And there's a really nice facility over in Maplewood. They have woodworking classes. Can you believe it? You'd love it. I nodded. I said maybe. I asked if they wanted more coffee. I gave them every signal that I was a reasonable, slightly confused old man who was open to being guided gently toward the door of his own life. It was easy. People believe what they want to believe, and what Daniel and Karen wanted to believe was that I was declining, compliant, and ready to be managed. So I gave them that. I gave them all of it. If this is your first time watching this channel, welcome. Subscribe. We tell stories here worth hearing. Stories about people who refuse to disappear quietly. And tell me where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Ohio, Texas, England, wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. The developer arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a silver truck too clean to belong to anyone who did real work. His name was Greg Calloway, mid-40s, very white teeth, a handshake that lasted a beat too long. Daniel introduced him as someone who was looking at properties in the area, which is the kind of vague that only sounds innocent when you want it to. Calloway walked through my house with the eyes of a man who is calculating demolition costs, while nodding politely at your family photographs. He tapped walls. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked out at the backyard for a long time, without saying what he was looking at. He said the lot had real potential for a small development. I offered him a glass of water. He said he was fine. I sat in my chair and watched them walk through the rooms I'd painted, the floors I'd refinished, the porch I'd rebuilt from scratch after a storm took half of it in 2009. They moved through my life like it was already a vacant property. The Sunday dinner 2 weeks later is the one I won't forget. Karen spoke about the sale the way you'd speak about a home improvement project that's finally getting done. Something overdue, slightly inconvenient, ultimately for the best. The market timing is actually good right now, she said, cutting her food without looking up. And with what the house would bring, Walter could be really comfortable. Walter, not Dad, not even him. Walter, a figure in a financial plan. Daniel nodded along and glanced at me to see how I was taking it. I was taking it with a forkful of mashed potatoes and a vague look out the window. I was, as far as they could tell, barely tracking the conversation. Good. That was exactly where I needed them. The papers turned everything cold. I found them by accident, or what felt like accident but maybe wasn't, because when you're paying close attention to something, everything eventually finds a way to show itself. I'd been looking for an old insurance document in the file box Daniel had started keeping in the hallway closet. He'd explained it as being easier to have everything in one place, and I'd accepted that explanation the way I accepted most things, without argument, with the mild expression of a man who appreciates being helped. The file box had my name on a tab. Inside was a folder I hadn't seen before. Inside the folder was a letter of intent, signed by Daniel and countersigned by Calloway's company, dated 6 weeks earlier. 6 weeks. While I'd been eating Sunday dinners and nodding at discussions about Maplewood and asking Karen to pass the salt, they had already signed a letter of intent on a house that was not theirs to negotiate. The number on the document, the agreed purchase price, was lower than the figure they'd mentioned to me. Not by a small margin, by the kind of margin that answers a question you hadn't yet found the words for. I stood in that hallway for a long time. I don't know how long. Long enough for the light to shift. I thought about Margaret, about what she'd have said, about the particular expression she'd make when she'd caught someone being dishonest. Not angry exactly, more like deeply tired and faintly disappointed. She used to say that the saddest thing about dishonesty is that it costs the person doing it far more than it costs the person it's done to. I put the folder back exactly where I found it. I went and sat in the kitchen and made a cup of coffee and looked out at the yard. And then I started thinking. Not panicking, not grieving, thinking. The way I used to think when a car came into the shop with a problem nobody else could diagnose. Slowly, methodically, starting from the beginning. I called Earl Dobbins the next morning, 83 years old, retired county assessor, 40 years of property records in his head, and a filing cabinet in his basement that was, in my experience, better organized than most county offices. We'd been friends since our kids played Little League together. I told him I had a property question. He said, "Come on over." I brought a coffee cake from the bakery on Route 9, and we spent a long morning at his kitchen table going through everything he knew about the parcel history on my address. What he found didn't surprise me exactly. It confirmed something I'd suspected for years, but never had reason to formally pursue. There was an easement discrepancy in the back quarter of the lot, related to a drainage agreement made with the neighboring property in the late 1970s. The agreement had never been properly recorded. It wasn't invisible if you knew where to look, but nobody developing a property in a hurry would think to look there. That easement, unresolved, would create a title defect significant enough to stall any closing indefinitely. Then I called Patricia Osei. She'd been practicing real estate law in this county for 30 years before I'd ever heard her name, and I'd met her once at a community meeting about a zoning dispute and been impressed enough to keep her card in my wallet. I went to her office on a Wednesday and sat down across from her desk and told her everything. She listened the way good lawyers listen, quietly, writing nothing down, watching my face. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Hayes, what your son signed is not legally binding without your participation, and what this developer is counting on is that you won't know that." I asked her what I could do. She told me. We began. For 3 more weeks, I was the same man they'd always seen, a little slow, a little vague, asking Daniel to repeat things, nodding at Karen's suggestions about room sizes in assisted living facilities, declining politely when they offered to help me get organized. I took my coffee on the porch in the mornings. I tended the yard. I watched the neighborhood the way I'd always watched it, the way mechanics watch everything, looking for what doesn't fit, for the small signal that tells you where the real problem is. Daniel called twice a week. His voice had the careful cheerfulness of someone who believes they're managing a situation. I gave him nothing to worry about. Inside, I was working. "I want to stop here and ask you something. If you found out someone in your own family had done this, had gone behind your back, signed papers on your property, arranged your future without your knowledge, what would you do? Would you confront them immediately? Would you go quiet?" I think about that question because I chose quiet, and I know that's not the choice everyone would make. Tell me what you do. I mean that. The comments are there. The closing was scheduled for a Tuesday. Daniel called me on the Sunday to explain the plan in simple terms, where we were going, what we would do, how long it would take. He spoke the way you'd explain a doctor's appointment to a child. I said I understood. I said I'd be ready. I spent that evening on the phone with Patricia going over the order of everything one last time. I slept well. I'd slept well for the last 10 days, actually, better than I had in years. There's something clarifying about knowing exactly what you're going to do. The title company's office had the particular beige quiet of rooms where significant things are decided in unremarkable surroundings. Calloway was there with a colleague. Daniel and Karen sat across the table from me, and Karen had a folder of her own. The title officer began to go through the documents. Patricia arrived 7 minutes in. She sat down next to me, set her briefcase on the table, and opened it. She placed 3 items in front of the title officer. A formal title search documenting the unrecorded easement discrepancy. A letter from me dated 4 weeks prior, explicitly stating that I had not authorized any person to negotiate on my behalf in matters related to my property, and a 1-page summary from Patricia's office outlining the legal exposure Callaway's company now faced as a result of proceeding with a transaction involving a defective title and a principal who had never consented. The title officer read. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when everyone understands that what they expected to happen is not going to happen. Callaway's expression shifted through several things in quick succession. Daniel went pale. Karen put her folder down. I sat with my hands on the table and said nothing. I had earned the right to say nothing. In the parking lot afterward, Daniel caught up with me at my truck. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked older than he had at breakfast. Finally he said, "Why didn't you just tell me, Dad?" I looked at him for a moment before I answered. "For the same reason you didn't tell me," I said. It wasn't a cruel thing to say. It was the only true one. The weeks that followed were not easy. Daniel and I didn't speak much for a while. Karen stopped coming to Sunday dinners. Callaway's company had legal problems of their own to sort out. I won't go into the details because some of them are still pending, and none of it is my satisfaction to take. Things settled the way things settle when you stop forcing them. Gradually, imperfectly, but in the right direction. One evening in December, Daniel showed up without Karen, without calling ahead. He stood on my porch for a minute before I opened the door. He came in and sat at the kitchen table where we'd eaten 1,000 dinners. He didn't apologize exactly. He said, "I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a problem to solve." I gave him coffee. I told him that was the beginning of an honest conversation, and that I'd been waiting a long time for one. He stayed 3 hours. That night after he left, I sat on the porch in the cold for a while. The sky was clear. Margaret's reading glasses were on the table inside where they always are. The house was mine. Not as a victory exactly. More like a restoration of something that should never have been put in question. I've spent 86 years learning the difference between things that matter and things that only seem to. The deed to this house matters. The memories in these walls matter. The 41 years of a life lived here with a person I loved matter. What Callaway wanted to build on this lot does not matter. What Daniel thought he needed does not matter, not in the way he thought it did. I know the difference. I've had time. Here is what I want to leave you with, and I mean this for anyone listening who has been made to feel like they've aged past the point of relevance, who has sat in a room and felt themselves being discussed rather than included. You are not finished. Your silence is not confusion. Your patience is not weakness. The years behind you are not baggage. They are leverage, if you know how to use them. And the people who counted you out because you moved a little slower and spoke a little softer may one day sit across from you in a beige room and understand too late what a serious miscalculation that was. I'll end with this. When was the last time you looked at someone older and assumed you understood the full picture? And are you certain, are you really certain that you were right?